everybody. This is Spiral Process Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Dimitri, and today we have a special guest, Amy Hyun Swart, LMFT. Hey, Amy.
Hey, Dimitri. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here.
Sure. Why don't you start by introducing yourself, what you do, how you do it?
Sounds good. Yeah, I I am a uh expressive arts and somatic based therapist. I specialize in grief and trauma, traumatic loss, and I love group work. So been doing a lot of groups, especially grief groups lately. It's kind of my jam these days. So my new thing that I've been doing is giving grief trainings at like different nonprofits and stuff. And I call it like a training because it feels so weird to be putting up slides and talking about it from more of like a left brain place when grief is such a right brain emotional experience. So actually all the trainings are more for the therapist to do some experientials and inquiry into their own relationship with grief. And that is how I got into the field. I started off wanting to do more just like I'm an expressive arts therapist and have it be very based on the medium because grief just felt too scary and heavy and sad. But over time I just realized that this is my story. This is how I got into the field. And I've just learned to embrace that. And I think the more that we have the capacity to be with our own grief in our bodies and because grief is such a physical experience, like we tears come out of our eyes, we hunch over, we can feel like an actual like stabbing pain in our hearts. There's even research that shows when you have a really especially like a really recent or traumatic loss, your brain is very similar to somebody who's had a traumatic brain injury, and reading comprehension can become like that of a fifth grader. So it's a very physical experience. So to learn how to be with grief, yeah, physically and also emotionally for yourself, the more we can be able to swim in this type of water, the more we can be a better guide for others.
Before you go any further, I want to ask you a question because um, I often find myself being caught in like nomenclature or a sort of proverbial or stereotypical meaning of certain words like grief. And I'd rather not. I'd rather learn more about it. So, and I'm wondering, can you, can you do your best to explain what is grief or I'm hoping I could learn something new because I don't fully understand what it is, but I'm wondering if you can share about what you think it is.
Yeah, happy to. Okay, so
Uh-huh.
there's loss, like loss is like what creates the whole. Like if someone dies, if there's a breakup,
Mhm.
there's also disenfranchised grief or losses, like not having the life that you expected at this age. Uh, uh um
Like
Ancestral.
not getting married or something, or not having kids or something like that, or some
Yeah,
kind of
and
expectation that you may have had, huh?
to buy a house like your
Buy a
parents
house. Oh, right. Hmm.
or like have a particular type of lifestyle. I mean, there's so many different kinds of ways we experience things that people wouldn't imagine as loss, but they are. And it can be really validating to name it as a loss. Even like expecting to feel a sense of safety and harmony with the earth right now. I mean, climate grief is becoming more talked about, thankfully. Yeah, so there's the loss, and then grief is like our response to the loss.
Hmm.
Some people would describe mourning as more of a public experience. It can get really detailed if,
A
but I
grief is response to loss. Interesting.
response to the loss.
Uh-huh.
And some people even distinguish between grief and bereavement. I think because grief has really become a hot button topic these days, it feels almost like the new trauma or something of the
Hmm.
like 2010s whenever like The Body Keeps the Score came out. And people also use the word bereavement as a way to distinguish from grief, where bereavement is very specifically around loss of a person. Um,
Hmm.
and it can be hard to be in a group where maybe one person is experiencing um, like grief around the climate or social injustices, and there's another person who's maybe grieving the loss of a child.
I see. Right, and that could be different. And then you mentioned you said mourning has a sort of public kind of implication or something. Is that right?
I like mourning, I think of as keening, like the Celtic tradition, or mourning in a like at a funeral, like publicly crying.
You're being witnessed or something, huh?
Yeah, like a funeral procession. Um,
And that could be
yeah,
important
like
too, to be witnessed, right? To be witnessed while you're grieving or something. Maybe that's mourning.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I mean, we're using all these different terms, but I do tend to just say grief. But I think when you break it down, mourning is more around being witnessed. Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm. And I guess that's important too, right? Because sometimes you can't really feel something unless you're maybe given a container or given permission or with a certain kind of background context or something, right?
Oh my God, it's so true. Like that's why I like the grief groups, because
Hmm.
you're with other people, and say you might have a more defended way of being around grief. If you see somebody else and you're really resonating with their story about their loss, and they start to tear up and their voice starts to catch and they start to, their breathing changes, like we're such relational beings that invites us to start to feel that grief too.
Right. Yeah.
It's contagious in that way.
Probably essential to feel that full sense of completion, to have that community
Hmm.
experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, how many artifacts, like when you go into museums, they come from grief rituals of some sort, like the different kinds of sarcophaguses, or the in the little I'm thinking of the like the yeah, those Egyptian little like vases of different um body parts that were, it's not like someone made that and then took it to the tomb by themselves and then had their little thing by themselves. It's like, no, they probably had a whole group with them as they paid tribute and mourned the loss of these people. So it's so in our deep, deep ancestry to grieve communally or to mourn with others.
Mm.
But in our world where everything has become so isolated, it's
And pain avoidant,
pain avoidant for sure,
right?
right?
Like with the medical system kind of making it more like keep it in the hospital, or like, there's this, it's interesting that paradox or that contradiction between like modern world, which is pain avoidant, like, you know, people, there's like epidural and like, there's this movement away from feeling, the difficulties. Um, and then you have this, like you're saying, like these sort of processions and these old like traditions where they really honored that process.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like and because we've gone so far, it almost, I've thought about it this way, it's almost like it's a form of, to embrace it, it's almost like a form of hedonism now, because now you're asked to like, oh no, lean into the pain. So now it's kind of like, oh, it's a sacred thing to like embrace,
Mm-hmm.
almost like embrace the pain.
Oh yeah.
You would think of as form of hedonism or something, like
Because it's like enlivening.
yeah, you're like, oh, like when somebody is like mourning, they're like, oh, like they're almost like kind of reveling in it or something.
Yeah, I mean they're feeling it. So this actually reminds me. So I have a mentor that I really am influenced by, Francis Weller. He wrote the book Wild Edge of Sorrow, and he talks about this flatline culture that we live in. Like think of like an EKG machine, right? And it's like there's room for like excitement and stimulation, but there's not much room for like true uplifting joy. And we have a lot of depression and yeah, just a lot of depression and numbing out, but not room for the deep, deep sorrow
Go all the way in it, right?
all
Mhm.
the way down, right? But when we feel the deep, deep sorrow, that's when we can feel the high, like the highs and the lows are two sides of the same coin. But we need to feel those deep sorrows to feel the deep joys. And honestly, in the grief groups and gatherings and rituals that I've held space for, you see both of those feelings so much. And you see how it just opens you up. Like that's like the Joanna Macy quote.
Yes.
The broken heart can hold the whole world. So it's like when if we can let ourselves feel into that deep, deep grief, like we can, well, I guess this is going into a different topic, but when we feel into that grief of our own pain, it's like we can feel into all kinds of grief. It's like our heart breaks open so we can hold so much more.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know who said it, but somehow I picked up along the way this idea that you can let grief season your soul,
Mm.
um, instead of it being like some kind of blemish, or that it somehow ruins you or something, but instead it can kind of season you, make you a more tasteful human being
Yeah.
because you're touched by, grief and sorrow, and you're more like textured and um, alive.
Yeah, that reminds me of that saying. I don't know how much I like it. It's a little mean, but it's like there's elders and there's olders. Like you have to be called by someone else to be an elder. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, I'm 65, I am now an elder." But it's like how certain things ripen us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing you said, and I don't know if you wanted to move on, but one thing that I wanted to underline is that earlier you said that there's a distinction between bereavement, bereavement, which implies the loss of a person, whereas grief could be more general, or a certain experience or process that somebody didn't get to do something or didn't live something out. Um, I think perhaps maybe it is something to explore, and even just for the field of psychology too, because I also agree with the fact that somehow this, trauma informed perspective, or like you mentioned the body keeps a score as like a kind of a milestone. Um, it also opens up this kind of more generalist term of like trauma, because if you think about it, like gravity is oppressive. Um, just by the virtue of it pushing down on you, and so you can fall and get hurt, and so gravity is your oppressor. And so then you start to think, wow, like every aspect of life has some kind of traumatic component to it.
Mm,
Then if
mm,
you water it down that much,
mm,
then it becomes almost trivial. The word doesn't, it loses all of its meaning because it doesn't have any. It's one thing that a person gets like, beaten or something, or
mhm,
abused, and it's like those traumatic. But then if you like broaden it, and it becomes like, well, everything is like the wind, and whatever, anything that can be hurtful. And I think that then it's true what you're saying is that it leaves people to maybe feel like invalidated in the sense that, like, well, if you well, my pain is real, and you're just a privileged white person that didn't get their white picket fence, and or whatever. And how do you hold space for such a variety of so-called traumas, or experiences of grief?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So I also, even though I feel the legitimacy of the like we really need spaces for people who've had like a recent loss, like especially the death of a child or something really traumatic. Like it's just like that is a type of soul-shattering event that needs a lot of care and to be around other people who really get that kind of loss. And at the same time, I also hold the value and importance of seeing how all grief, like if it's truly grief, David Kessler says the worst grief is your grief. Like if a little kid lost his teddy bear and he's never experienced another loss before, like that is his worst grief. And to not judge other people's grief, but like if someone is feeling deep shattering, like also soul shattering loss for the planet or something, like I think that that can be really real. And if there's people in a group where someone might be feeling climate grief, some person might be feeling grief over having an incredibly horrific childhood, some person might be feeling grief over losing their beloved dog of 18 years. There's a way that we can see ourselves in each other's grief, and that can actually be a way to bring us closer. And that is something that we need so desperately in these times, to find ways to come together and see each other in our humanity. And I think that grief can be a road into that humanity and compassion for one another.
Hmm.
But it needs to be done skillfully, and you need to have the right group of people, and at a stage of in their grief where they feel like they can share, that they're open to being with others who have different kinds of grief.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions, and like like the span of grief, or how to skillfully move through grief, and can grief be self-serving, or can there be like some of my clients, I wonder if maybe they experience like an overindulgence in grief, or um there's this whole Taoist idea of like the path of least resistance, like like if you need to move um a heavy piece of furniture from one room to another, you can pick it up and bring it, or you can use a hand truck. And so, like in the Taoist tradition, they say, well, it's only cheating to use the hand truck if you've defined the terms to be like you're trying to prove that you're strong enough. But if you don't care that you're strong enough, then it's probably better to use the hand truck. Um, and I wonder, like, what you think, and you obviously work with grief, and like, what is maybe it's a difficult question, but like, is there like like, is there like a lifespan, or how does grief unfold? And are there like skillful means to get through it in a way that is skillful or non, or can do have are people susceptible to like becoming attached to um grief, or hanging on to this feeling more than maybe it's healthy for them? These
So
are I have a bunch of questions about that.
can you tell me like an example of like what that would look like if somebody is hanging on to grief?
Like
Like
maybe like somebody attached to the idea of them being a widow, or like a kind of a poor me, like like an identity structure, like, oh, this happened to me, and then I'm, you know what I'm saying? Like, can that be kind of a trap or something? Or
yeah, yeah. So like there is something that happens when we lose somebody. It's like we're forever changed and we can't really get over. I don't really believe we can heal our I don't really like the idea of healing grief or
Mhm.
because it's like if you experience a loss like that like for so my story is my dad was killed when I was young. That doesn't go away. That is always going to be there. And it's not like I feel like I need to cry every time I talk about it, but I do feel that. Like it was just Father's Day yesterday and it still feels there's a little there's a soreness there.
Mm,
It doesn't go away.
mhm.
So when somebody's when you're saying if it's like somebody's going through like a poor me thing, I wonder if that person might actually just be really needing a lot of witnessing and attention.
Oh, just to go more into it, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's like maybe no one people keep like ignoring them. I mean, this is so common when we experience losses, the belief that like, oh, nobody wants to hear me talk about my dead dad anymore. Everyone's sick of hearing me tell the same stories over and over. And there's a way that that attention, that witnessing, like you named Dimitri at the very beginning, like the witnessing is like the key. Again,
Mhm.
that's why I love the groups, is like we need to be witnessed in our grief more now than ever before in these increasingly isolated times.
I love that. Yeah, just going more into it, huh? That's so totally paradoxical, right? Just keep feeling it.
This is where we as clinicians need to get better at being with others in their grief because if say I don't if I'm somebody who doesn't know my own story of grief or I've say my dad died and I didn't do any work around it and someone comes to me and said, "Well, my dad died." And I'm just like, "Okay." And, like let's move on. That's like how we can usher a client out of their grief experience and try to get them to feel maybe something that we're more comfortable feeling because grief is really hard to be with.
Mm,
It's so like you talk about gravity. I mean, I think grief and gravity have a similar root word. It's heavy.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I love that answer. It's so beautiful. Um, and I also want to continue to chisel away. I still feel like, and I think your answers are beautiful. I'm wondering what you'll say about, and forgive me if I'm playing devil's advocate, but it's only in in order to understand it better.
I love it.
Uh,
No, we need
what
this.
what about the transcendental, like the spiritual, like this idea that beneath the personality, um, beneath the personhood, that we have like a that unwoundable core that is beyond biography and beyond identification, this sort of like stripping of the onion, this proverbial contemplative spiritual idea that like that there's a part of you that has never been wounded can't get wounded because it doesn't identify. It's like an unconditional observer or soul or something like that. Um, what do you think about that as far as, and how does that, like, what role does that play in grief? Or is it like spiritual bypass to seek that sort of, spiritual soul level that is beyond pain or beyond suffering? Is that spiritual bypass, or can that be used also simultaneously? Is that also useful as far as people moving through grief?
Wow, that's a really big, complicated question.
Gotcha.
I think I'm following. So, I mean, what I'm thinking of is when you started off and you're like, grief is like hedonism, like, wow, like feel all the feelings and
Right.
feeling. And ah, like there is a way that when we allow ourselves to, like, we give ourselves permission to feel the feralness of grief, um, to like there's a fear that like so many people express this fear that if they open that door, they're never gonna come back out. Like
Abyss or something, right? Hmm.
yeah, they're gonna walk into the abyss and never come back again.
Hmm. Hmm.
But the truth is like when we avoid that grief, talk about the flatline culture in that place of um just numbed out, numbness to life, like that's what we end up doing. And how many of us in the world right now are numbing out to life because we don't want to feel our grief? And good luck trying to feel that essence of that, like numinous, pure spirit, untouched piece of the onion if you're numbing out all the time.
Hmm.
Like grief is like a way that, if anything, I actually see it as a way that like strips us to the core. It brings us in touch with like all that is so real. Like my grandma, I don't think you ever met my mama Joe.
At the wedding, I
Dimitri,
think.
you did. Yeah, oh my god. So mama Joe, my fucking best friend, yeah, fucking love her to death. She was like my person. When mama Joe died, it was wild. Like it was when she finally passed away, I was both grieving and like singing and dancing at the same time because I was just so happy she was free. And I was like, Brad and I went on a walk afterwards. Like it was dark at like over towards the water, Chrissy Field, and I was just ecstatic. And I felt like that felt like enlightenment to me because I was just so alive. It's like she's finally free. And it was just such a beautiful feeling. Of course, the next day I was depressed as hell. Um, I guess not depressed. I was deep in the sadness and also probably depressed. I would go up and down. But I think there's a way that grief can actually bring us to that purity that you're naming. So
No,
when
I
people
love that. That's beautiful. Right. So maybe by feeling through that, then you can kind of move beyond those layers or something, huh?
yeah, and to not resist whatever it is that is keeping that door closed because there's a price that we pay to keep that door closed.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess the thing that kind of not stumps me, but the little snags is that somehow people can perhaps maybe accrue unnecessary feelings of hurt, um, but only by definition. You know how like somebody can feel abandoned by us, but we didn't do anything to abandon them. Like it's like somebody can call you and then you didn't pick up your phone because you were like taking a bath or something, and then but then that triggers that so they can accrue a sense of pain by creating a story
Mhm.
about themselves or you and how you hurt them. And then, but you on the other end may not have anything to do with that, or have nothing but loving intentions to the other person. And so, um, I'm wondering if is there room to like not to exclude what you're saying. Like what I hear you saying is yes, we have to allow and feel more into and leave room and be witnessed with the grief. But is there like that sort of more cognitive, like can a person accrue unnecessary grief by virtue of creating stories in their mind about
Yeah,
their own disenfranchisement? Does that
yeah,
make sense?
yeah. I hear what you're saying. I mean, I wouldn't say that that person is grieving. I would say that that person is hiding behind, like, like it sounds like what you're describing is someone who's got a victim mentality, who feels like,
From trauma or something, right? From their
mhm,
parents not being there for them
yeah,
or something, right?
yeah. And that is very cerebral. Like what you're describing, like coming up with assumptions, coming up with stories,
Mhm,
like
mhm.
that is like a it's hard to grieve something that is a story that you're telling yourself that you're not sure is true or not.
But it
Having
sounds like you're kind of delineating. Maybe there's a difference there, perhaps, which is helpful.
Well, I think that if somebody was deeply traumatized and had this tendency to find themselves as the victim in a lot of situations and experiences in life, I still think that it's important to find that thread of whatever it is that they did lose. I mean, I hear what you're saying, like how to not collude with this person's um tendency to feel like
Misery or something, right?
the
Yeah.
world is against them all the time. Like,
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, yeah, I think your answers are beautiful. I'm just wondering, is there an exception? Like, is there and it's maybe not. I mean, it sounds like you're saying maybe even that person I mean, especially if they cut to the core and if their inner child was abandoned or something, that's a level of loss that they need to be witnessed at anyways, right?
it's like you just got to find the actual thing that needs to, like,
Uh-huh.
say I'm working with a person who's like feeling like the gas station person was being mean to them, and then this friend's mean to them, and this friend's mean to them, and this friend's mean to them. It's like, wait, what is actually going on? Like, it's showing some pain again that wasn't witnessed. Like, I think when there's like that much of a cry for help, it's like there's something that's not being witnessed.
Mhm.
And to find that place in their story and to tend to that part of them, maybe that little 3-year-old who
Right.
didn't, or
And I
something.
think maybe what I'm getting out of this too is that maybe the difference is that when it's not centered in the here and now,
Mm,
it's where it can get mixed up, right? Because if you're thinking that it's the when you're thinking it's the store clerk,
mhm.
it may have nothing to do with your grief, but you're projecting it maybe. So
Yeah,
that's where it can get kind of mixed up, right?
yeah.
And
I
you're
mean,
projecting your grief into the present.
yeah, yeah. I like that.
That can get hairy, huh?
Really, yeah, this is like thought-provoking stuff. I like your questions.
Yeah? Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, because the reason why I think about these things is I experience it, and I don't always have a clear cut with it with my clients. I think there are some cases where it's like, bam, they come in and they're grieving, and those are, in a way, those are kind of easy because they're like, it's very cut and dry. Like you just go into it, but in some cases it is mixed in with these projections. And then that's where it's a little bit more complicated as far as like mental karate, and I think some of these Buddhist techniques are helpful to, how to stay present, um, and how to discern what is kind of illusory, or what is this like disowned or projected. That's where it gets kind of complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to help them be able to name their grief first. I mean, that's probably the first step, to help them to find what it is that they're really, that they lost, that they miss, that they're not getting back.
Hmm. Right.
I mean, there's a way that grief is so painful and scary to face that we would rather be caught up in assumptions that were like this example of somebody who feels like all these people, they're having all these interpersonal issues. It's like it would be, it's almost easier to stay with that than to go into the grief of
What it's
I'm
really about.
happened to me when I was 3 or whatever, you know.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that. That's it. It's almost like an adaptation to not feeling those things. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I love somatic therapy and just working with the body,
Hmm.
because that'll just drop you right into it. It's like if somebody is like, or let use this example again, like, yeah, this friend did this thing, like all the other friends, they abandoned me, and it's like, okay, we'll stay with that. Notice where you feel it in your body, and it's like, oh, I feel like this heaviness in my chest, and my shoulders are slumping, and I've got like this shame thing happening. And then it's like, okay, and what does that remind you of? And it's like, oh, yeah, this is familiar. So it
Hmm.
gets us out of the story. Our bodies are holding it all for us.
Yep, that's the secret. Okay. Well, I'm noticing we're running out of time. Any last words of encouragement?
Figure, well, words of encouragement. I want to share a quote by Amana Brembry Johnson.
Hmm.
And this is about how I'm interpreting this quote in terms of like how we need to re envision grief and make more space for people to feel grief, and to feel like feel the sadness of what we've been numbing ourselves out from, um so we can actually begin to feel more, and to bring our humanity back into the world, which is so needed right now, and um to to find a place where grief is actually an incredible value in society. So Amana Brembry Johnson says, we need to create a narrative for a world so brilliant it renders the current world obsolete. We have forgotten how one shifts by offering a world so brilliant it makes the others look so unimaginative. We can't just think our way out of the old context, but formulate a new language, a new orientation. We need to see in the darkness, to feel what's next. Let it arise within us. How do we see a new world that hasn't even existed?
It's beautiful.
So maybe in the future there will be grief gatherings all over the place, and people will be able to feel their grief in community without feeling shame or numb to it, and have more compassion for themselves and each other.
Hmm. Maybe some of those indigenous values can be
Mm-hmm.
revived.
Mm-hmm. May it be so.
Okay, Amy, thank you so much. We'll be in touch and maybe we'll record another one. It sounds like there's a lot to talk about here.
I told you.
All right.
Good to see you, Dimitri. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.